Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with the Reign of Hormozd. The envoy spoke, and Bahram listened, and when he answered his words were somber. He said, "Among those who have pride and nobility, you are a byword for evil, an idle king who talks too much and has no one's respect. Your previous message and this one show me you're a great talker. Certainly, someone whose luck is running out will try to save himself with speeches. In your pointless prattle, I can hear that your heart is fearful, that you're terrified of being defeated. When you say you'll kill our king and give me his throne and army, you remind me of how when a poor man is driven from a village, he will always claim that he was the village headman, that everyone else was his inferior, and he was in charge. But the sun will not shine on our deeds for 2 more days before I send your bloody head spitted on a lance to our king. As for your talk about my being grateful to you and hailing you as an honorable king because you'll give me your child in marriage and the throne of Iran, where I'll be your ally, my answer is that my lance is now next to your ear and that I shall cut off your head with my sword. And when you're gone, your head and crown and treasure, as well as your daughter and all you've taken such pains to accumulate, will be mine. And your boast of having more crowns and thrones and elephants and cavalry than anyone can count, remind me of the nobleman who, when he was in the thick of battle, said that a thirsty dog barks louder the further away from water he is. Devils must have captured your heart to make you come to fight against my king, but you'll writhe in pain when God punishes you, and you'll remember the evil deeds you've committed. And then you claim that crowned kings are your servants, and that all the cities of the world are yours, and hear and bear witness to your greatness. Well, the ways open to those cities, and servants and kings alike can take it. But if you knock at their gates, the only sovereignty they'll grant you is over waste reed beds. You talk about pardoning me, but you've forgotten my courage. You can pardon me when you see my lance, then you won't be calling me your subject. When my army's drawn up for battle, I don't care a copper coin for your troops and ambition and elephants and throne. If you're a king, why do you lie so much? There's no way to win glory in the world. I've told my king that in 3 days' time, when the sun lights up the sky in splendor, he will see your head spitted on a lance before his throne." The envoy's cheeks turned sallow, as if he himself was having a once flourishing fortune were now old and decrepit. He took the message to Saveh Shah, whose face darkened when he heard it. But his son said, "What do such boasts matter? We should weep with pity for their contemptible army." The son went to his pavilion, gave orders for cymbals and Indian bells, elephants and war drums, and directed that the heavens be filled with their din. While his son was preparing for battle in this way, Saveh Shah was filled with anxiety. He said to his son, "All our army loves you, but don't attack until dawn." The 2 armies retreated to their tents, and sentries were posted before the pavilions. On each side, campfires flickered, and the world was filled with noise of the 2 armies. Bahram was alone in his tent when he summoned the Persian commanders, and they discussed the coming battle until nightfall. Then the Turks and Persians alike slept, and ambitious men who were eager to conquer the world forgot its claims. As Bahram slept within his tent, his heart was preoccupied all night with the coming battle. And in the lion warrior's mind it seemed as though the Turks had won. Great Bahram dreamed his army was destroyed, and when he tried to flee, the paths were blocked on every side. On foot now and alone, he scoured the plain for warriors who could help him, but in vain. He was uneasy when he woke, and his mind, which was usually so resourceful, was filled with foreboding. The night was dark, and sorrow was his companion. He hid his dream and mentioned it to no one. At that moment, Khored Borzan arrived after fleeing from Saveh Shah. "Your one hope is to retreat, and quickly," he said. "No one in all the world has ever seen an army as massive as Saveh Shah's. What makes you so confident? Look at the devil's trap you're falling into. Don't throw Persian souls to the wind. Think of our brave warriors' lives. Find it in your heart to have pity on your own life, because you have never faced anything like this before." Bahram replied, "All men from your town can do is sell fish from summer to winter. Your calling is to handle nets by a lake shore. You're not a man for maces and swords and arrows, but when the sun raises its head above the mountains, I'll show you how to fight with Saveh Shah." When the sun rose in the sign of Leo and the world turned as white as a Roman's face, trumpets were sounded and the earth trembled with the pounding of horses' hooves. Bahram drew up his army and mounted his horse, flourishing his well-tried mace in his hand. There were 3,000 armored and experienced cavalry on the right flank of his forces, and he sent as many warlike horsemen to the left flank. One side was commanded by Azar-Gashhap, and the other by Gashhap in the rear was Yalan Sinha, whose men were armed with maces and were to attack last. The van was commanded to Hamdan Gashhap, whose horse hoofs spread fire in the reed beds. Each of them commanded 3,000 cavalry eager for war. A herald announced Bahram's message to his troops. "Great warriors with your golden helmets, if anyone flees from his battle, even if he's faced by a lion or a leopard, I swear by God I shall cut his head off from his body and give his corpse to the flames." There were 2 paths from the camp by which one could easily retreat, and Bahram had blocked both with a high wall of earth, while he himself took up his position in the center of the army. When the king's scribe saw this, he came to Bahram and said, "This is beyond all reason. Your foolish boasting has gone on long enough. Look at the armies drawn up here while we're all like a white hare lost on a black ox's hide. Things will go badly for Iran in this battle. Our land will be destroyed, will be overrun by Turks, and not a field or river or mountain will remain to us." Bahram yelled at him, "Stick to your ink and paper. Who told you to count our troops? Do what you're hired to do." The scribe went to Khored Borzan and said, "Bahram's bewitched by some devil." The 2 scribes looked for a way to flee, fearing the catastrophe they felt sure would come. They went to a hill overlooking the battlefield and fixed their eyes on Bahram's helmet to see how he fired when the fighting began in earnest. When Bahram had drawn up his troops ready for battle, he turned aside, groaning in anguish from the battlefield. He prostrated himself in the dust before God and cried out, "O Lord of truth and justice, if you see my cause as wrong, protect my enemy. But if it is your cause for which I fight, make my heart calm, strengthen my army's might. Give us a joyful victor and bless the world with riches, peace, and happiness." Still weeping, he mounted his horse, his ox-headed mace in his fist. Now, Saveh Shah addressed his troops. "Begin your magic so that the hearts and eyes of the Persians will tremble, and no harm will come to you." All his magicians set about their business, and fire darted through the air. A wind rose up, and a black cloud poured down arrows. Bahram cried out, "Noble lords and Persian warriors, take no notice of this magic. Go forward to war with rage in your hearts. If the only hope they have is sorcery and magic, we should weep for the poor wretches." A cry went up from the Persian side, and they readied themselves for combat. Saveh Shah saw that the magic had done him no good, and he attacked on the left like a wolf falling on a lamb. When he had broken their ranks, he turned toward the center where Bahram was. Bahram saw his men flee. He charged forward with his lance. Unseated 3 horsemen, he shouted, "This is how to fight. This is our custom and how we carry it out. Have you no shame before God or before our noble warriors?" Then, like a hungry lion, he made his way over to the left flank and shattered the enemy's ranks so thoroughly that their leader's banner disappeared. From there, he turned back toward the center and said to his commander, "This is a desperate business. If the battle goes on much longer, our army will be scattered. Look for some way to retreat." They went and searched, but there was no way back. The road was blocked by a wall of earth. Bahram said to his commanders, "We have an iron wall ahead of us. Any man who can get through it will reach safety and take his soul back to Iran and our king. Prepare your hearts to shed blood. Now, lift your shields above your heads and draw your swords. No one should despair of God's help, even if the bright day turns dark before us." For his part, Saveh Shah addressed his officers, "Bring the elephants forward into the thick of the fighting. Make the Persians' world dark and desperate." Seeing the elephants in the far distance, Bahram grew anxious and drew his sword. He said to his warriors, "Place your helmets on your heads and have your bows from shock ready. By the head and soul of the world's king, beloved of our chieftains, crown of our nobility, I order whoever has a bow to make it ready immediately. Shoot 3 of your poplar arrows tipped with heads that draw blood into the elephants' trunks. Then flourish your maces and go forward to kill the enemy." Bahram placed his steel helmet on his head, drew back his bow, a hail of arrows rained down, and his army charged forward. The elephants' trunks were wounded by the arrows, and the plain grew sodden with their blood. Maddened by their wounds, the elephants turned back and trampled their own troops. Fortune had turned against them. Saveh Shah's army was in turmoil, and many died. Bahram's troops pursued the elephants, and the earth was like a Nile of blood. There was a pleasant hill near the battlefield to the rear of the struggling army, and Saveh Shah had gone there to sit on a golden throne and observe the battle. He saw his army like a moving mountain of iron, the soldiers' heads covered in dust, their souls downcast, and behind them came the maddened elephants, trampling the troops as they stampeded. With tears in his eyes, Saveh Shah tried to comprehend how his army had been routed. He mounted a dun Arab horse and fled, fearing for his life. Bahram came after him like a raging elephant, his lariat on his shoulder, his bow in his hand. He called to his troops, "Fortune has turned against them. This is no time for reminiscing and talking. Pursue them with your swords, rain arrows down on them, show your mettle as a cavalry." He made his way to the hill where Saveh Shah had sat crowned on his golden throne, and saw him fleeing in the distance. He sped after him, moving like a cloud across the sky, and selecting an arrow with a glittering head, flighted with 4 eagle feathers. Placing the thumbstall against the deer-string string, he leveled the bow with his hand and drew back the string with his right, and the cha-cha bow groaned at its bent, and as he pulled the deer-string skin back to his ear, that too cried. The arrow sped from his hand and pierced back to his ear that cried too. Saveh Shah's spine was pierced. Saveh Shah's head descended into the dust, and the earth beneath him ran with blood. And so, this famous king with his armies and golden throne and golden crown was vanquished. This is the way of the turning heavens, with show neither love nor kindness. Don't pride yourself on your high throne, and take care to stay far from harm. When Bahram reached him, he dragged him face down through the dust and cut off his head. None of Saveh Shah's men came near as he did so. Later, seeing his headless body lying on the road, they lamented their loss. The land was filled with wailing, the sky with distress. Saveh Shah's son said, "This was the work of God. Bahram's good fortune was with him. Our army had no room to maneuver, and that was what killed so many of us. The elephants trampled many of our warriors, and not one man in 10 survived. Many either perished beneath the elephants' feet or had their heads cut off on the battlefield. When this evil day had passed, not one of the enemy could be seen alive, except for those who had been taken prisoner. Their bodies were wounded by arrows, their souls by sorrow. The way was filled with barding and helmets, heads that helmets had betrayed to death, Indian swords, arrows, and bows. The ground was like a sea of blood from the dead, and everywhere saddled horses stood ownerless. Bahram searched diligently for the Persian dead, asking Khored-Borzan for help. "Share my troubles for a day. Look to see who among the Persians has been killed, whom we have to mourn for." Khored-Borzan went over the whole site, peering in every tent and pavilion. For some time, a fine cavalry commander named Bahram was missing. He was a nobleman and descendant from Saveh Shah. Khored-Borzan desperately searched high and low, but could not find any trace of him. He turned over the wounded and dead, but found nothing. Bahram Chubieh was very distressed, but eventually the man appeared, like a key to open a locked door, and leading a weeping red-haired Turk whose heart was eaten up with sorrow. When Bahram saw Bahram, he said, "May you never lie beneath the dust." Then he turned to the ugly Turk and said, "You, with a hellish face so far from heaven, what kind of man are you? What's your name and your tribe? Your mother should weep for you now." The man replied, "I'm a magician. I am the opposite of a straightforward, honorable man. When my lord goes to war against someone and gets into difficulties, I set to work. At night, I show people things in their sleep, and this disturbs even those who are calm and careful by nature. It was I who sent you the nightmare that bothered you so much. But I should try for something stronger because my spells didn't work. Our stars let us down, and all my efforts disperse like so much wind. If you'll spare me, you'll find a very skillful assistant." Bahram carefully considered the man's words, but his heart was troubled, and his face turned sallow. At first he thought, "This man would be useful on the day of battle if I've got into difficulties." But then he thought, "But what use was his magic to Saveh Shah? All benefits come from God," and he ordered that the man's head be cut off. When the man had been killed, Bahram stood up and said, "O Lord of justice and righteousness, all greatness, victory, and the divine far, might and imperial power, misery and joy come from you. Blessings on the warriors who follow your way." Then the chief scribe came forward and spoke. "O terrifying champion, neither Feridan nor Kesra Nushan-Ravan ever saw a warrior like you. All the cities of Iran flourish because of you. All our champions are your slaves. Through you the throne has found good fortune. Through you its subjects are exalted. You are a commander born of commanders. Happy the mother who bore such a son. Your lineage is splendid, and your mind is splendid. You are a pillar that supports all our country." Then all the nobles and champions of the army left the battlefield. Darkness braided its hair, and the braids covered men's eyes in sleep. Night's ebony curtain appeared, and the world rested from the din of drums. Swiftly the heavens turned, as if they thought the night tarried too long, until the golden ship arose from the water, bringing both sorrow and driving away sleep. Bahram ordered his men to sever the heads of all the slain Turkish nobles and chieftains and place a banner behind each head. The prisoners and heads were gathered together and taken from the battlefield. Then Bahram summoned his scribe and dictated a letter to the king describing the enemy's innumerable army and changing fortunes of battle, the stratagems, fighting and maneuvering against the enemy's forces, the Persians' struggles and prowess, and the cavalry who fought all day without respite. He selected an eloquent envoy from among his soldiers to take the letter and trophies. First, he spitted Saveh's head on a lance and put it with the banner Saveh Shah had carried in battle. Likewise, he spitted the heads of the Turanian nobles on lances and sent them with banners of the Chinese cavalry. He ordered that all these be taken directly to the Persian king. The prisoners and plunder he deposited untouched in Herat, awaiting the king's orders as to what was to be done with them. With the heads, he also sent a number of horsemen to learn whether the king wished him to attack Parmadu, Saveh Shah's son. For their part, the Turks and Chinese warriors made their way to Tehran naked and bereft of their weapons, horses, and baggage. When news of this reached Parmadu, he flung the crown from his head. The Turks bitterly lamented their dead nobles. Smearing their heads with dust, they wept, and no one ate, or rested, or slept. Parmadu summoned the warriors, and weeping bitter tears, asked them how their innumerable army had been defeated in battle. Their spokesman replied, "We thought their army of no account, but no one has ever seen a horseman like Bahram when he fights. In battle, he's greater than Rostam, and no warrior will stay to oppose him. Their army was not 100th of ours, but the best of our warriors was child compared to them. God guided him, and if I say more, you will not want to hear it." Parmadu brooded in his heart on Bahram's deeds. Then, seething with rage, he decided to attack. He still had 100,000 warriors under his arms, so he led his armies out on the plains and marched towards Oxus. The champion's letter reached Hormozd as he was sitting with his advisers and saying, "My wise counselors, it is now 2 weeks since we have heard anything from Bahram. What do you think of this? What should we do? We must discuss this matter." And at that moment, the chamberlain entered and gave Hormozd the good news. "May the king reign prosperously forever. Bahram has defeated Saveh Shah, and may the world splendid by his victory." Bahram's envoy was summoned, and seated in a higher place than the king's advisers, he said, "Great king, the battle turned out as you would wish. May you live peacefully and happily, because your enemy's fortune has grown old. The heads of Saveh Shah and his younger son, whom his father called his crown prince, are spitted on lances at your door, and all the city stares at them." The king heard this and stood up, but immediately he bowed before God and said, "O judge and guide, it is you who have destroyed our enemies. I was in such despair, and had no hope that my enemy would be overcome. It was not my commander who did this, or his army. It was God who accomplished this victory." Then he brought out 130,000 coins that he had inherited from his father, and distributed a third of that sum to the poor, mostly to his courtiers and servants. Another third he gave to the fire temples for the priests who conduct the rites to celebrate the festivals of Nowruz and Sada, and the last third was given to individuals who would undertake to rebuild ruined caravanserais in the desert, so that men could travel there safely without fear. Then he remitted 4 years of taxes on both the poor and nobles who sat on ivory thrones. Next, he sent a letter to the ruler of every province, saying that Bahram had been victorious and had cut off the head of Saveh Shah. Hormozd worshipped God for 7 days, and on the 8th he summoned Bahram's messenger and again sat him higher than any other courtiers. He planted a sapling in the garden of greatness by writing a fine answer to Bahram's letter. He sent him a silver throne and a pair of golden shoes, as well as other goods, and wrote a charter making him Lord of Katlan and Budakshan, as far as the river bank. He ordered him to give the plunder from the battlefield to his soldiers, except for Saveh Shah's personal treasure, which was to be sent to the royal court, and he directed Bahram to attack Parmadu immediately before he became a formidable enemy. Before he left, the envoy was given a robe of honor. When he reached Bahram, the commander welcomed him warmly and did what the king had ordered, distributing the spoils of war to his soldiers, except for the evil Saveh Shah's treasures, which he sent to the king's court under the care of trustworthy men. Then the commander and his army marched out to war. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends.